All right, here we go. So my name is Scott, and I'm a counselor with NOCD. I'm gonna have to get used to seeing my own face and not talking back to somebody on this thing. But yeah, so I'm a counselor with NOCD, and I absolutely love ERP and what I've seen, the changes I've seen in people. So yeah, I'm here to answer any questions that you guys might have, and just try to be helpful. If you're just starting out, or you've been doing this a while and you just need some new ideas or whatever it might be. So hopefully you guys get something out of this. All right. Let's see. Okay. All right. So let's start with this question here. All right. So sexual orientation OCD. They said they have treatment. With treatment from ERP, it makes me feel confused about my sexual orientation. How do we differentiate between denial and OCD? Do people ever recover from this subtype? What does recovery look like? So I like the word recovery better than recover, because, OCD is something that's going to be lifelong. Everybody has intrusive thoughts. People with OCD, have a more of an emotional response to them. But everybody does have them. So as far as recover goes, you want to shift your expectations there and just kind of know that it's a process and always deal with it to some degree. So the way I've explained this to a couple folks that I've worked with is OCD always wants certainty, and when it comes to sexual orientation, nobody's certain of that. We have confidence to different degrees, but no one is certain that they're straight or gay or, bisexual or whatever it may be. So there's always going to be some uncertainty there. My recommendation would be follow your values, follow what you're feeling, as far as what you think, you might want in that moment. That might not be the right way to go about it, but searching for certainty around this is not going to be something that's attainable. But being patient with yourself, open to what, life might look like, and but just being true to yourself, maybe asking, if I didn't have OCD, how would I be addressing this? So let's look at some more questions. All right, how about this one? All right. She says, I get scared, or he, I get scared that I may have done something stupid or get ridiculed online. My brain begins to create these memories and thoughts that I begin to believe. How do I get myself to stop ruminating on it? So this is probably a common response I'll have tonight. But, I would respond with, maybe you did. We all say something stupid every now and then to some degree, right? Nobody is immune from embarrassing themselves, or if they are, I want to meet them. But, so I would approach it with, maybe you did, and that doesn't have to mean anything either, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. And maybe it means something, maybe it doesn't. But either way, life is going to go on. But you want to sit with that discomfort because maybe we all have, but that doesn't have to mean anything. You're not any less human or any less you because of it. So the ruminating, a big way to kind of put a dent in that is embrace the uncertainty. But if you're looking for certainty around it, you're probably not going to get it. Let's see. Dr. Farrell, you're the man. All right. Let's see. All right. My OCD prevents me from making decisions to move forward in life because it wants me to seek all perfection. Well, perfection is an idea, but it's not really something that's attainable. I'd say that even, not to be a jerk or anything, but even the times where you have thought you did something perfectly, it's likely, maybe, possibly you didn't, So this is likely kind of an illusion that OCD is made up, where it's like, you have to make the perfect decision or do the perfect thing, or figure out what that is before that decision can be made. But that kind of thing doesn't exist. There's pros and cons to everything, finding the perfect spouse or raising your kids perfectly. We all make mistakes all the time. It's just part of being human. So intentionally doing things imperfectly, that's somewhere to start. Start with something small and work your way up. But, embracing that idea that I'm not perfect, you're not perfect, and maybe we're all just doing the best we can. Maybe we're not. But, embracing that idea of, that we're human and not going to be perfect. Just make the best decision that you can at the time with the information that you have, and learn to be kind to yourself, if things don't work out. All right. Let's see. All right. This is a good question. Is there a difference between OCD intrusive thoughts and just intrusive thoughts that cause emotional distress because you're a sensitive person and don't like those thoughts? Well, yeah. Just kind of go into the definition of it. And I'm not going to get all technical, but it's really just a matter of, is this something that's impacting your life for an hour or more a day? Then you probably meet criteria for OCD. If not, then maybe you don't. But it's, everybody has intrusive thoughts. Going back to that, they all, impact us in varying degrees of emotional distress. The more associated they are with our values and attacking, what's important to us, they tend to, cause more emotional distress. But, remembering that everybody, it's just a spectrum. Everybody has them. It's part of being human. And if if that's something you experience for more than an hour a day, then maybe you might meet criteria for OCD. But I would probably see a counselor and just have an evaluation or an assessment done just to get some more confidence there. I don't want to say certainty, but all right. Let's see. Let me go up here. I was worrying I wouldn't talk as much being alone, but I think anybody that knows me knows that wasn't going to happen. and Jamie. I'm not leading any NOCD support groups right now, but I was in the past, and I'm hoping to do that more again in the future. I love doing groups. So. Let's see. All right, let's go to this one about ROCD. Okay. So how to deal with ROCD and partner insecurities, and dwelling about imperfections and picking up fights and obsessing over stupid bullshit and saying mean stuff to each other. Well, I think I'm a big expectations person. What are you expecting to happen? How are you expecting somebody to behave? We're all human, so we're gonna do things. I mean, I piss off my wife all the time, I'm sure, with the best intentions, and she does the same to me. And but how do we go about addressing those altercations? Remembering why you're in the relationship, what's important to you. Now, you don't want to reassure yourself if you have ROCD about those things, but it's all about the process of this stuff. If you don't want to do that when you're anxious in the situation, you get triggered by something, you're anxious, you start reassuring yourself. You don't want to do that, but just generally as you go through the day, if you're not in an anxious state, try to remember why you're with that person, and asking yourself, is this worth getting, being right in this situation? Because all relationships are going to have friction. To be honest with you, the people I work with OCD, they're some of the kindest, most compassionate people. So there's pros and cons to everything, including OCD. And, so trying to think about those things, why you're with them, the values of the person, your values, and make decisions based on that. When you're at that crossroads of, do I want to pick a fight right now? Because I can either be right or I can be happy. That's a good little question. So let's see. All right, this is a good one. It seems like nowadays things that I like and enjoy are starting to trigger me with anxiety. Is this OCD or is this something else? Well, I don't know your story, Wally, but I will tell you that with OCD, it attacks the things we value. That's what makes the intrusive thoughts so distressing. So it's possible that that's OCD. I don't know if you've gotten an assessment to see if you have it, but that is the kind of thing that OCD does attack. So it's possible. Yeah. I'm doing my best not to give reassurance or too much certainty, because it just, I don't know the backstories and that kind of stuff, but at the same time, just generally, it's better to embrace that uncertainty as much as possible, and make decisions based on what you value. Let's see. Okay, this is good. I have obsessive thoughts over memories that I viewed as embarrassing. The thoughts are so overwhelming that I hit my face and or get a physical response. How do I explain this to a therapist? You know, in my experience, I can't speak for every therapist, but us therapists, we hear a lot. There's not many times, especially recently, where I've been shocked by much. So I would, take your time. Don't put too much pressure on yourself talking to your therapist, but, it's probably not going to shock them as much as you think. But as far as like treatment and stuff like that, I would do exposures around embarrassing yourself now. A lot of this goes back to core fears. What are you afraid is going to happen? And when you do things, in line with that, and, hopefully, I'm not going to throw out the certainty there either, but, hopefully things don't turn out as bad as you think. And you learn that, I can survive these things without it being, the end of the world or so distressing that I don't recover or it go away. And, going back to being human, and we all do stuff to embarrass ourselves. I do, I know. So, yeah, but suddenly, it empowers you doing that, where it's not such a big deal that you've embarrassed yourself. Oh, this is good. So she says, I'm going home next week, the place where my OCD started and was rock bottom. How do I confront that fear in context of fear to those emotions and feeling how I felt then and intrusive thoughts? Well, first of all, that's awesome that you're going back there because you know this about yourself and yet you're still going to go. So that's huge right there. So give yourself some credit with that. I would do some exposures around, that area, that experience, looking at pictures of the house, maybe looking at pictures of your family in the house, or maybe writing about the memories, depending on how intense, the emotion is going to be around that. You don't want it to be overwhelming. You want to be challenging, but not overwhelming. So maybe easing yourself in by looking at pictures, writing down a memory, just different ways you can kind of expose yourself to that environment without being there. And even when you get there, take time, maybe sit in the car a little while outside the house, and sit with the discomfort there. Do what you have to do to kind of be able to do it, and be patient. And anyway, yeah. All right. I think the nerves are slowly going away. They're pretty intense at first, but they're getting better. Let's see. Okay, let's try this one. I feel that if I don't confess my real event OCD thoughts, they'll never go away. Any advice? Well, my first question would be, have they gone away from you confessing them so far? How many people is it going to take for you to get relief and not feel the urge to confess or obsess about it? Because confessing is definitely a compulsion. So my suggestion would be to stop confessing it. But I mean, if you haven't at all, find a therapist, develop some trust and rapport with them, and, share it with them. But, confessing to everybody, including random people, because you're going to run out of people eventually, right? You confess to the person, your friends, family, where are you going to draw the line? Because eventually you'll be confessing to your boss, or, it's going to get in the way of you being successful and having the life you want. So accepting that confessing is a compulsion, and, working on exposures and sitting with that discomfort, because the confessing is only going to temporarily relieve it and fuel that cycle, because that's how this works. So, all right. From Anna, real event OCD makes me feel so different from others because I actually did do many horrible mistakes. What to do? Well, I'll start off by saying that I don't know how many people I've talked to who say that theirs is the worst, and all these things. And I don't know what you did in the past, but, working on some self-compassion and forgiveness, making amends if possible with them, doing what you can to make things right. But, unless you killed somebody, this isn't, you don't have to serve a life sentence, So maybe coming to the realization that, hey, I'm keeping myself on the hook. Nobody else has got me in handcuffs but me. And, but it's a process. All this is a process. I don't know about the guilt, all this discomfort. It doesn't have to just be anxiety from this stuff. Whatever discomfort you're feeling, leaning into that and feeling it, crying if you need to. But, just knowing that you're the one that's holding yourself on the hook. So I hope that's helpful to you, Anna. All right. So Davika, is it possible to have fluctuations throughout the day for ROCD? I don't know what's real and fake anymore. Yeah, it is possible. If it was happening all the time, it would be pretty, it'd be a lot easier to nail down this kind of stuff, right? So with ROCD, it's really, when I've worked with people with this, it's a lot about, asking yourself, what would I do if I didn't have OCD in this moment? What do I want to do that OCD's doubting? Am I really attracted to that person enough, or something like that? That thought comes in when you want to go hug them or hold their hand or do something that's beneficial to the relationship. Do it anyway. A lot of this is experimentation to see what works, what doesn't. That's what happens all the time with exposures. Sometimes you get in the middle of an exposure and it's like, oh, that gave me reassurance, or that wasn't triggering. And it's just a lot of trial and error to figure out what works and what doesn't. And also remembering that everybody has doubts in their relationship. Nobody is certain they're with the right person. Or even asking yourself, what would a person, as far as a healthy relationship, what would a good next step be to do. But yeah, fluctuations and thoughts and feelings about people all the time, all the time. Okay. Kate. I'm trying to improve my OCD by myself, but it's so hard to know what I should be doing to cope with my thoughts. I have multiple OCD themes with both mental and physical compulsions. Well, the compulsions are the fuel for the cycle. So if you can work to minimize compulsions as much as possible, of course, the goal is to not do any compulsions, but if you're doing this on your own, work hard to do as little as you can as far as compulsions go. And as far as responding to intrusive thoughts, you want to embrace that uncertainty. When those thoughts come in, whatever the theme may be, you want to say, yeah, that's possible, because OCD is always after the certainty. It wants you to be certain about whatever whatever it's about, so that you'll be safe from it. Like, are you sure you're not going to hurt that person? I don't know, maybe, right? I've had folks say, I don't want to hurt anybody ever. It's like, well, what if somebody broke in your house and came after your kids? Would you hurt them then? Or intrusive thoughts about family members, hurting them. It's like, well, if you got put in that position where your brother's got a knife to your mama's throat or something, or you had to do something, right? Not trying to trigger anybody, but if you get in one of those situations and you got to do something, so embracing the possibility that these things are going to happen. It doesn't mean they will, but just, getting to a place where it's like, I don't know what's going to happen. And in that moment, I'm going to do my best to make a decision based on my values, and what I think is the right thing to do, because I don't know. Anyway. All right. I've been all over the place with these questions. I'm sorry, y'all. Let me go back up. All right, let's try this one from Bill. Why do I worry so much about something being wrong with my wife and mother and my cat even? I worry about other things as well. Well, that's a common theme with OCD subtype. Worrying that something bad is going to happen. There's really no why to it. It's why because you love them, and OCD wants you to figure out a way where they're safe and everything's taken care of. And, if you figure out every possible threat, they'll be okay. And that just isn't possible. There's too many things out there, and, we could come up with a list together and we still wouldn't think of everything, so it's just not possible to be prepared for everything. But it's but that's why. Okay. All right, elk. Let's see, or ELK. Okay. I feel like anytime I get feelings for someone, I end up feeling really stuck in repetitive and obsessive thoughts. What do I do? I feel like I can never love healthily. Healthily. Well, I think all of us, I try to normalize a lot of this because I think it's true. OCD just blows things out of proportion. There's no perfect way to love anybody or completely healthy way to love somebody. Now, as far as the rumination goes, or the repetitive obsessive thoughts, it's, I don't know what those thoughts might be, but you want to embrace the uncertainty with it. If you're having doubts about it, their feelings for you, your feelings for them, it's, if two humans are in a relationship, there's going to be some kind of issue, but you want to sit with that discomfort, with that uncertainty about it, and then do something else after that. Because I'm guessing the urge is going to be to just seek more after that. But as far as, you mentioned that word healthy, being in a relationship that's healthy, you don't want to be thinking about that person all the time. You want to live your own life too as an individual. And so doing something you enjoy or you find productive, or just something separate from that person when you're done, doing that exposure or sitting with that discomfort, and just kind of trying to develop some boundaries of your own where you have a life outside of that person. But shoot, if there's a way to completely love somebody in a healthy way, I'm not there. I think we're all doing our best, or maybe not, right? All right. All right. Is there a point in any contamination, OCD, ERP during the pandemic? The threat is real. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. The threat is real. But, there wouldn't be much living if it was just all about, being safe from the pandemic. This is a hard topic because, it really comes down to the details. All of these things do, what are you doing to be safe, or, take precautions, if you're washing your hand, you go out in public and you come back and you've touched things and all that, and you wash your hands once. Okay. Yeah, that's responsible. But if you're washing your hands 10 times or for 5 straight minutes, that's probably excessive. So I would probably look, I think it's 20 or 30 seconds washing your hands. What are you doing, compared to the folks around you? This is kind of a hairy topic, but if something's taken over your life, it's just, I think going back to values once again would be helpful with this. What am I doing? Am I living my life based on my values, or am I making a lot of decisions maybe based out of fear or anxiety from what OCD is telling me? And what are my loved ones around me telling me? I hope that's helpful. Okay. Okay. How do I know I'm ready to dedicate to recovering? I give up. 18 years, I'm done. Anytime I worked a lot with drug and alcohol treatment before starting to work with NOCD. And we talked a lot about a day at a time, um, making it a day at a time. Because I think if somebody asked earlier about recovered, this is going to be a process, making small steps on a daily basis. Maybe the next day taking steps back, but continuing to try, and having compassion for yourself when things don't go as well as you'd hoped, or you gave into compulsions or whatever it may be. And just taking it one day at a time and being patient and kind to yourself. And, because this is the longest relationship we got, right, with ourselves. So I hope that's helpful. All right. I love this, Jasmine. Personally, panic attacks that come with OCD triggers feel like death, and ERP feel like rebirth. I'm always surprised myself by how much I am able to do. I've started to apply ERP everywhere in my life. That is so wonderful. And I think I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago when I was here with Medina, but Dr. McGrath mentioned something about making ERP a lifestyle, and I love that. I think about that often. It's why I really try not to have much certainty with much of anything, because I think there's so many variables at play that the more you embrace it, ERP everywhere in life, it's, you kind of expect the anxiety to come or the discomfort. But because you're exposed to it so much, you start to build confidence that you can deal with it and feel it and overcome it and do the things you want to do instead of what OCD tells you, despite how you feel. Because all feelings will pass, good, bad, whatever. So anyway, I'm so glad to hear that, Jasmine. Let's see. Some of these I'm skipping over just because I can't really answer. So it's nothing personal. Okay. All right, Holly. My biggest thing is the guilt I feel for the thoughts I have. I still don't know how to let them not make me feel like a horrible person. Do you have any suggestions? Well, first of all, the thought is just a thought. It doesn't have to have any meaning. It doesn't have to mean anything about your character or who you are, or, what you're the person you're trying to be, anything like that. I don't know if you're working with a counselor right now, but I like writing, and writing out scenarios, and maybe, I don't know what your fear is around it, but saying maybe I do this, maybe maybe this does happen, maybe I do like this. Because of the fighting of it, trying to say, oh, I would never do that, or, the compulsions to kind of reassure or deny or fight it is what fuels that cycle and that guilt. And, just because you say maybe to something, maybe I would do that one day, or whatever it is, you still have a choice later. I've worked with folks that have suicidal OCD, and they worry, what if I take my own life in the future? It's like, well, maybe you will, but at that time, you'll have a choice. You'll be able to make a choice there. Even if stuff is around you all the time that you could hurt yourself with, you still gotta pick it up or use it or whatever. You still have a choice. So, anyway, I hope that's helpful, Holly. Okay. Mm-hmm. Hey, Mario. I hope you're doing well too. I'm not doing groups right now, but I'm hoping to again. I hope you're doing well too. Okay. All right. Yeah. Raul talked about this a little bit earlier. But as far as sex, I don't know if it's harm or sexual orientation you're talking about. But I'll talk about it as if it's sexual orientation. So a lot of folks want to have certainty that they're not some type of, either gay or straight or whatever it is. They want to be a certain way, and they don't want to have any doubts about that. But as far as sexual orientation, that's not something we can have certainty about. We have confidence in, it's possible, I'm married and have a couple kids, but it is possible that I'm not, that I'm gay, that I'm repressing that. Right. It's possible. And that's what you want to do with all these kinds of things. You want to embrace that possibility, that feared outcome could happen. Because the going back and trying to reassure and prove and all those things, it just keeps that cycle going. But no one has complete certainty that they are any type of, straight or gay or whatever it may be. All right. I think there's a lot of folks just having conversations. Maybe I'm going through these questions too quick. I don't know. All right, here's a good one. I have a hard time. I'm about to turn this fan on. All right. I have a hard time distinguishing between my social anxiety and OCD revolving around friends. I like this question a lot. It really comes down to what the fear is. With OCD, it's all about those intrusive thoughts. I don't know what the thoughts are, but I'll say with social anxiety, the cause or the main variable or part of that is a fear of being embarrassed in social situations, judged, saying the wrong thing, whatever it may be. With OCD, if it's involving social situations, it's, are you fear of having an intrusive thought in a social situation? Or does it go back to the social interaction itself and a feared outcome there? So it's really just about the details there, but I hope that's helpful. And it could be both. But really it's, what's the root? All right, Vana, how do you deal with contamination OCD? Well, no matter where you are, starting small. When I start to work with somebody, we figure out what their triggers are. And then we start talking about different exposure ideas around those triggers and coming up with different exposures with different levels of anxiety that they anticipate having with them. So with exposure work, you want to kind of treat it like you're lifting weights. You want to start small, build up your strength, and then slowly increase the weight. So figure out what your triggers are. Use an example of, if you're showering, 4 times a day for 20 minutes each time or something. Try to cut that back to 18 minutes or 15 minutes each time, or one of them for 5 minutes, 5 minutes off. Find something that's manageable, that's a little challenging, but not overwhelming, because you don't want to jump in the deep end. Okay. You want to slowly get in, build up your strength, kind of get familiar with the ERP process, where you're having discomfort, but it's not, overwhelming where it's like, oh, well, I can't do this, because you want to slowly build up so that it starts to feel like something you can do and continue doing. All right. This is an exposure in itself, doing this, because there's not a whole lot of feedback. I'm talking to myself, which I never do. All right. I had to make some jokes at some point. Let's see. Oh, okay. There's some more. Okay, this is a good one from Bill. I ask my wife and mother multiple times a day if they are okay and how they feel. What can I do to stop that? You can tell them to stop answering. Because if you stop getting a response, you can't completely put it on them, but if you're not getting reinforcement from them, that's going to impact your desire to do it, hopefully. But if they're answering, so needs a little bit more information here, but you want to get them to stop answering, but also, stop asking. Maybe delay asking them. Set a timer for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever's kind of challenging, but not too crazy. And delay the compulsion, which is asking questions. And then sit with the discomfort while you're doing that. Now the goal, of course, is to not ask at the end of that, but you can work up to that. But you need to talk to them and say, I need you to stop answering, which is not going to be easy for them, likely, but it's a process. But there's different things you can do. Delaying a compulsion is good. I'm drawing a blank, but those are a couple things you can do. I hope it works out, Bill. All right. All right. All right. I like this one. I'm avoiding bad words and numbers. Of course, I thought of cuss words immediately. I don't know if that's in there at all. How can I effectively do ERP by myself? I get panicky when someone says them, but can't tell people how to talk. Yeah. You could start by maybe writing down or saying words that are closely related to them. Maybe look up the definition of them or synonyms of them and say them or write them. Now, it all depends on how much, discomfort you have, of course, from doing this stuff, but try to do something that's related that isn't just straight to saying them or hearing them. And then working your way up, eventually, hopefully you can say them and write them and, shout them outside if they're not, that wouldn't get you arrested. But yeah, you can't control what other people say. So you can maybe ask other people to say it, Okay. This is good. All right, suppressing intrusive thoughts versus suppressing rumination. All right, so we all have those intrusive thoughts, right? We've talked about that a lot. Now, what you do with the intrusive thought is up to you. We can't control, whether or not we have intrusive thoughts, but we can control what we do with it. So once it comes in, whatever it is, you want to embrace that uncertainty around it, saying it could be true, or I could like that, or, maybe I will do that in the future. And then you want to turn your attention to how you feel, I'm a big believer in that. It's hard for me to just tell somebody to do nothing. You don't want to try to think about anything or distract yourself, but I'm a big believer in embracing that discomfort and feeling it. Because me personally, I got anxiety in my DNA. That's what I tell everybody. Ulcers run in my family. So I came out of the womb anxious. So I learned early on doing this ERP that if I lean in and feel the discomfort, I have less anxiety overall because I'm not trying to do something about it and make it go away. So yeah, that initial intrusive thought or whatever it is, you just don't want to go in and try to analyze it and fix it and, solve the problem or that kind of stuff with it. I use an analogy too with people where, say if you're at home and you work close to your house, right? So you walk to work, all right? And it's close, you're late. You need to get there on time, right? If you see somebody that on the way, you're not going to stop and talk to them and have a conversation, right? You probably stop briefly, acknowledge them, say hey, and keep going to what you were going to do. So that's how I recommend, responding to intrusive thoughts. Acknowledging them, but keep going back to what you were going to do, And if there's anxiety or discomfort from that, you want to feel it. But if not, just go back to what you were doing. So hope that's helpful. All right. Well, we got about 5 more minutes. Let me look through here, and anybody got any more questions, they can post them. Okay, this is a good one. How do you feel with feeling like embracing what might happen makes you afraid that it will happen? Well, there's really only one way to find out with that, right? There's no real evidence that embracing something, a thought or a feeling or whatever, is going to have an impact on an event happening. It depends, of course, on what it is, but feelings and emotions are not reliable things. So the really only way to do this is to test it. When we were first doing training for this job, they said they wanted us to write down a blank and then say, "We'll die tonight." And then they told us to write down the person we love the most in the blank. And to my knowledge, nobody's loved one died from that, right? I can sit here and say, I hope somebody dies, right? Or I hope my son dies or daughter, or right? But I seriously doubt anything's going to happen. And it doesn't make me a bad person or anything like that. I didn't commit any crimes. I don't want them to die. But, so my point is that embracing that feeling, I could even say, I hope it does, right? It isn't going to have any impact. And that's just the facts of it. But the only way to kind of get there to a better place emotionally is to test it out and to sit with that discomfort from it. Because if you keep trying to fight it and say, oh, well, I would never want that to happen, or, what can I do to prevent that from happening, or anything like that, that's just an endless rabbit hole. And because eventually, stuff's going to happen, right? So. All right. Well, we're about 58 minutes in, and I'm through all the questions I can think of. So I'll go ahead and stop it there. Hopefully that's okay, but maybe it's not, right? Anyway, I hope y'all have a great night, and hopefully I will be on here soon, and I wish everybody luck with their journey, and I appreciate and love you guys. All right. Bye-bye.